The man outweighed her by 80 pounds and had 3 combat deployments behind him. He came in fast, certain, the way men come when they've never been stopped. 5 seconds later, he was face down in the sand. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 18 of the most elite warriors in the United States Navy stood frozen in formation, staring at a 22-year-old woman with dark brown hair and calm gray eyes, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. She hadn't even adjusted her stance. "I warned you," she said quietly. "I always warn people first." If you want to see what happens next, subscribe, stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Coronado Naval Base sat at the edge of the Pacific like it owned the water, which, in a practical sense, it did. The training yard behind Building 14 was hard-packed sand and discipline, the kind of ground that had broken 10,000 men into soldiers and shaped a fraction of those soldiers into something harder to name. Riley Voss had been standing in that yard for 4 minutes before anyone acknowledged her. She was 22 years old, 5'6", 138 pounds of muscle and controlled stillness. Her dark brown hair hung loose past her shoulders. Not regulation, which was the first thing 3 different petty officers noticed and said nothing about, because something in the way she stood made casual comments feel like a poor decision. She wore an olive green fitted tee, deep V-neck, short sleeves, tucked into military camouflage cargo pants, bloused over tactical boots that had actual dirt on them. Not training yard dirt, the kind that came from somewhere else. Somewhere that didn't show up on standard deployment records. She had a photograph in her left breast pocket. She always had the photograph. The 18 SEALs in formation watched her the way combat veterans watch anything unfamiliar, with professional assessment wrapped inside casual contempt. She heard the whispers. She had been hearing variations of those whispers since the day she walked into a Navy recruiting office in Portland at 18 and said she wanted to be a SEAL. The recruiter had blinked at her for a full 3 seconds. Then he had smiled the way people smile when they're deciding whether to be kind or honest. She had not needed his kindness. She had not particularly needed his honesty either. That was 4 years ago. A lot had happened in 4 years. "Formation," said a voice at the front of the yard. Senior Chief Petty Officer Damian Cale, 29 years old, 6'3", the kind of man whose physical presence rearranged rooms. He had a jaw that looked structural, and eyes the color of shallow water over concrete. Pale blue, flat, already decided. He had led a direct action team through 7 months in Fallujah the previous year. He had lost 2 men and brought 6 home when the math suggested he should have lost 4. He was good. He knew he was good. That knowledge lived in every inch of him like load-bearing infrastructure. He looked at Riley Voss the way she had already cataloged in her memory under Type 3 challenge. Not aggressive yet, but positioned for it, waiting to see what she would do with the attention. She let the silence last exactly long enough to be deliberate. "My name is Riley Voss," she said. Her voice didn't perform anything. It just carried. "You have 30 seconds to decide whether you're going to waste the next 3 weeks or learn something that keeps you alive when your technology fails and your backup doesn't come. Your choice. Clock starts now." Nobody moved for 4 of those 30 seconds. Then Cale took 1 step forward, parade rest casual, which was its own kind of provocation. "Ma'am," he said, and the word carried just enough weight on the "ma'am" to mean something other than respect. "With all due respect, we just came back from Fallujah. We've run direct action in 3 countries in the last 18 months. What exactly is the plan here? Riley looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him, the way people look when they are actually gathering information. What's your hand-to-hand certification, Senior Chief? Combatives Level 4, Expert Rating. When did you last use it in the field? He paused, just half a second. November, Fallujah. Did it work? Obviously, I'm standing here. Were you the biggest person in that room? Another pause, longer. Yes. Then it wasn't your technique that worked, Riley said. It was your size. Step forward. The training yard did something Riley had watched training yards do 100 times. It held its breath. The men in formation didn't move, but they shifted. That collective micro-adjustment of attention that meant every set of eyes had just gotten sharper. Cale stepped forward. He smiled, and it wasn't unfriendly, which was somehow worse than if it had been. I don't want to hurt you. You won't, Riley said. The smile changed, hardened around the edges. He came in with a level 4 combination. Fast, textbook, built on the assumption that speed and mass closed most arguments before they started. Left jab to create distance, right cross following, shoulders rotating into it. The kind of power that had ended conversations in 3 countries. Riley moved a half-step left. His jab passed 2 inches from her face. His cross followed. She redirected it with her forearm, not blocking, guiding, adding to his own momentum and pulling it past her center line. Cale stumbled, one boot dragging in the sand. His balance fractured for exactly the amount of time she needed. Her hand found his wrist, pressure point, radial nerve, the specific application her father had shown her when she was 9 years old, on the back porch of their house in Portland, while her mother watched through the kitchen window, with an expression that mixed pride and resignation in equal measure. Cale's arm went numb from the elbow down. His body followed his arm, the way bodies do, natural response to sudden nerve disruption. Nothing personal, just physics. He hit the sand shoulder first and lay there for a full second, staring at the California sky. 5 seconds, start to finish. Riley stepped back. On your feet, Senior Chief. Cale got up slowly. His face was a controlled mask, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes had changed. The flat, casual certainty was gone, replaced by something sharper and more honest. He was actually looking at her now, for the first time. Again, he said. Same result, Riley told him. I'm warning you now. I wasn't ready. You were. That's the point. She turned to the formation. 18 men who had not moved, had not spoken, had not so much as adjusted their weight. What Senior Chief Cale experienced is fundamental principle 1. Superior technique defeats superior strength. He relied on power and speed. I relied on precision and leverage. In close quarters, precision wins. Every time. No exceptions. She turned back to Cale. He was looking at her with something new in his expression. Not respect yet. It was too early for respect. But the beginning of a question. She had seen that expression before. It was the expression of a man whose certainty had just developed a crack. He would fill that crack with anger before he filled it with understanding. That was predictable. That was fine. You want another round, Senior Chief? His jaw worked. Yeah, I do. Bring friends, Riley said. Anyone in this formation who thinks they can take me, step out. 5 of you. Let's see what Fallujah actually taught you. For a moment, nobody moved. Then a petty officer second class stepped out of formation. Then another. 2 more. Younger men, combat-tested, carrying the particular confidence of people who had been in real danger and survived it. They formed up around Cale, 5 against 1. At the back of the formation, Petty Officer Second Class Mara Solis watched with wide, careful eyes. She was the only other woman in the unit. 24 years old, 8 months of casual dismissal baked into her posture. The way she held her shoulders slightly forward, slightly small. The body language of someone who had learned to minimize herself to avoid the tax that came with taking up space. She had watched the demonstration. She had watched Cale hit the sand, and something was happening in her chest that she didn't have a word for yet, but that felt like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for a long time. Riley looked at the 5 men in front of her. "Rules," she said. "No strikes to the face or groin. No permanent damage. Everything else is available. When you tap or I put you down, you're done. Understood?" 5 nods. "Begin." They came together. Not stupid about it. Cale had at least taught them tactical geometry. Flanking positions. 1 from the front to draw focus. 2 from angles, looking to overwhelm through numbers and the simple mathematics of 5 to 1. Riley did not rush. She read the weight shifts, the eye movements, the 1,000 small signals that every body broadcasts before it commits to an action. The signals that most people never learn to see because nobody ever taught them to look. The Marine on point rushed first. She sidestepped, used his momentum, guided him directly into the man attacking from her left. They tangled, went down in a collision of limbs and cursing. 2 down. The man on her right grabbed for her arm. Control technique, trying to negate her leverage advantage by fixing her in place. She let him grip her, rotated her wrist against his thumb, the precise direction that broke the grip regardless of strength differential. Locked his elbow. He yelped, tapped the sand. She released him instantly. 3 down. Cale and 1 other remained. They circled. More careful now. Learning. Good instinct. Wrong timeline. Cale feinted left. His partner moved right. Classic pincer. Riley dropped low, swept the partner's front leg, pivoted before he hit the ground. Cale was already moving. Desperate now. Not the controlled desperation of a tactician, but the raw desperation of a man watching his narrative about himself disintegrate in real time. A wide haymaker, power behind it, but no precision. The punch of a man who has stopped thinking and started reacting. She blocked with her forearm, stepped inside his guard, and delivered a palm strike to his solar plexus. Controlled, precise, enough. The air left Cale's lungs in a single hard rush. He doubled forward. She guided him down, almost gently, the way you set down something heavy and valuable. 5 men, less than 2 minutes. Riley stepped back, not breathing hard. The training yard had gone completely, absolutely silent. She looked at Cale, who lay on the sand with his hands on his knees, working to get air back into his body, staring at the ground with an expression she recognized from 14 years of watching overconfident men recalibrate. "I told you," she said. "I always warn people first." She helped him to his feet. He took her hand, said nothing. But in his eyes, beneath the anger, beneath the bruised pride, beneath the calculation of a man deciding what comes next, there was the beginning of something he wouldn't have a name for until much later. The question that changes everything, when it finally arrives, is always the same. What don't I know? Riley turned to the formation. 18 men looking at her with expressions that had completed the full journey from contempt to shock to something that didn't have a comfortable name. At the back of the formation, Mara Solis had stopped making herself small. "I'm not here to embarrass you," Riley said. "I'm here to keep you alive. The techniques I just used were developed across decades of combat experience and passed to me by a man who gave everything he had so that others could come home. I'm going to give you what he gave me, and then I'm going to give you what I learned after that." She paused, let it settle. "My father was Commander Daniel Voss. He died in Kandahar 14 years ago. He was the best close-quarters combat specialist naval special warfare had ever seen. He saved 4 teammates the night he died. And he died because he hesitated for 3 seconds. The silence in the training yard had a different quality now. Heavier. I have spent 14 years making sure I never hesitate. For the next 3 weeks, I'm going to make sure you don't either." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. In the back, Mara Solis raised her hand. "Ma'am," she said, "can you teach us what you just did?" Riley looked at her, saw something familiar there. The hunger, the determination, the particular fire of someone who has been told they don't belong and has decided to make that everyone else's problem. "That," Riley said quietly, "is exactly why I'm here." The next morning, Damien Cale arrived at formation 30 seconds late. Not enough to be written up. Exactly enough to be a statement. Riley noted it without expression, without comment, without even looking at her watch. She simply waited until he was in position and then said, "Drop and give me 50, Senior Chief. When you're done, rejoin the formation." The yard went still. Cale looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation, anger, the rapid internal arithmetic of a man weighing options. Then he dropped and started counting. Fast, clean reps, the kind designed to communicate that this was no punishment at all, that he could do this all morning and it meant nothing. Riley watched him finish. "Thank you, Senior Chief. Fall in." He fell in, said nothing, but 3 men near the back of the formation exchanged a look, and Riley saw it, cataloged it, filed it away. The look said, "She won that one," which meant the game was still running, which meant Cale was not finished. She had expected this. She had trained for this. The resistance after the first demonstration was almost always more dangerous than the resistance before it, because it was smarter. Men who had been publicly humiliated didn't come back the same way twice. They adapted. They worked around the edges. They used patience and subtlety the way Riley used precision, as a weapon. The morning drill was hand-to-hand fundamentals. Riley paired them deliberately. Bigger men with smaller partners. Veterans with newer operators. She watched the pairings find their rhythms, corrected grips, adjusted stances, moved through the formation like a current. When she reached Mara Solis, she stopped. Mara was paired with a petty officer named Garrett, who had a full 8 inches on her, and the particular kind of practiced patience that meant he was waiting for her to make a mistake so he could correct it helpfully, which was its own kind of condescension. "Show me your entry technique," Riley said. Mara executed it. Technically correct, mechanically perfect. And completely without conviction, the movements of someone performing for evaluation rather than fighting for survival. "Again," Riley said, "but this time I want you to mean it." Mara looked at her. Something shifted. She reset her stance and executed the technique again, and this time there was weight behind it. The entry had velocity, the grip had intent. Garrett's eyes widened slightly. "Better," Riley said. That's the difference between training and surviving. One of them is a performance. The other one is a decision. Make the decision every time. She moved on. But she felt Mara watching her back for a long time after that. By noon, the unit had drilled for 4 hours, and the resentment was running in 2 directions. Half the men were starting to engage, genuinely, the way people engage when they realize the information is real and the source knows what they're talking about. Petty Officer Jax Corwin, 26, had stopped performing skepticism somewhere around the 3rd hour and started asking actual questions, the kind that came from genuine confusion rather than challenge. Why this grip angle? Why not the larger muscle group? Why does momentum matter more than strength at close range? Riley answered every question with the same precision she brought to everything else, not because she was performing patience, because she had actually thought about all of it, had spent 14 years thinking about it, had gone back to first principles on every technique until she understood not just the what, but the why, deep enough to rebuild it from scratch if she had to. The other half of the unit was still watching Cale, which was the problem. He wasn't doing anything wrong. That was the craft of it. He executed every drill correctly, responded to every instruction with a yes ma'am that had all the technical requirements of respect and none of the actual content. He was present and absent at the same time, a man going through required motions while broadcasting to every man watching that his actual opinion had not changed. Riley had seen this before. She had been this before, on the receiving end of it, from instructors who looked through her during her first year of training and responded to her questions with a particular patience of people who had already decided the answer didn't matter because the asker wasn't going to last. She knew exactly how corrosive it was, how it spread, how 6 men following one man's quiet contempt could hollow out a training program from the inside. After evening dismissal, she found Rear Admiral Marcus Holt in his office. Holt was 61 years old, compact and direct, with the economical way of moving that career operators never quite lost. He had served 3 combat tours and spent the last decade managing programs that the Navy wanted to believe in without committing to. He had pushed for this program specifically, had put his name on it, had brought Riley in because he had known her father and knew what Daniel Voss had built in his daughter. "Cale," Riley said without preamble. Holt leaned back. "Yeah?" "He's not going to break, sir. Not from instruction. He needs a different kind of pressure." "What kind?" "Consequence. Real stakes. Not a drill where he can phone it in and still technically pass." She paused. "I want to accelerate the field exercise. Move it up 48 hours. Holt was quiet for a moment. "The Pentagon observers arrive on day 21. We need full unit performance by then." "I know. But if Cale spends another week doing what he's doing, he'll pull half that formation with him. I'd rather test them while they're uncomfortable than evaluate them after they've had time to develop comfortable bad habits. Vice Admiral Chen lands in 6 days. Good. Let her see the real version." Holt looked at her for a long time, with the expression of a man deciding whether the asset in front of him was making a tactical decision or a personal one. "Your father used to make calls like this," he said finally. "Move fast before the resistance calcifies." "Did it work?" "Usually." He paused. "Not always." Riley held his gaze. "I'm not my father, sir." "No," he said. "You're not." He turned to his desk. "I'll approve the timeline. You've got 5 days to prep. Don't waste them." She was almost at the door when he spoke again. "Riley." She turned. "He's going to come at you again before the exercise. Harder than yesterday. He's been talking to the other men." She nodded once. "I know." How you handle it sets the tone for everything that follows. I know that too, sir. She walked out into the night air and stood still for exactly 30 seconds, running the variables. And then she went back to the barracks and knocked on Mara Solis's door. Mara opened it in civilian clothes, off-duty, looking startled and then something else. Wary. The way people look when good things arrive unexpectedly, and they're not sure yet if it's real. Get your boots, Riley said. Training yard, 30 minutes. It's 2200, ma'am. I know what time it is. Mara got her boots. In the training yard, under the California stars, Riley spent an hour teaching her one thing: how to break a grip from a larger opponent using wrist rotation and body rotation simultaneously, combining two mechanical principles that individually were manageable and together were nearly impossible to counter, regardless of size differential. Mara was clumsy at first, kept trying to use her arm strength instead of trusting the geometry. Riley stopped her, reset her, explained it again. Not from a manual, from her own body. From the place where her father's voice and 14 years of repetition had fused into something that was just knowing. By the end of the hour, Mara had it. Not perfectly, but genuinely. The technique had moved from her conscious mind into something closer to instinct. She stood in the sand, breathing hard, looking at her own hands like she was recalculating something fundamental. Ma'am, she said, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you stay calm when they're looking at you like that? Like you don't belong here? Riley considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. I stopped waiting for them to agree with me, she said. The question isn't whether they think I belong. The question is whether I can keep them alive when everything goes wrong. That's the only question that matters in this yard. Everything else is noise. Mara was quiet for a moment. Cale's been telling the others the program is political, that you're here because someone upstairs wants a headline. There it was. Not a surprise, but hearing it spoken out loud in another person's voice made it real in a different way. I know, Riley said. What are you going to do? Riley looked at the dark yard, at the space where 18 men would stand in the morning, some of them still deciding whether to learn, and some of them already decided against it. Nothing, she said. Not yet. She let Mara go, stood alone for a moment in the dark, one hand on the photograph in her breast pocket, without taking it out. Her father's face behind the Kevlar, behind the uniform, behind the 14 years. She had not inherited his hesitation. She had worked too long and too hard to eliminate it. But she had inherited something else from him. The knowledge that some battles had to be lost before they could be won. That the right moment was worth waiting for, even when waiting felt like losing ground. Cale was building something. She could feel it. She would let him build it. And then she would let it fall. The confrontation came on day 4, and it came exactly the way Riley had expected. Not in the open, not as a direct challenge, but sideways, the way smart resistance always moved when it had learned that frontal attacks didn't work. It came through Jax Corwin. Morning drill, hand-to-hand pairings, Riley moving through the formation correcting technique. She reached the center of the yard and found Corwin paired not with his assigned partner, but with Cale, who had rearranged 2 pairings without a word to anyone and was now running Corwin through a takedown sequence that was technically correct and specifically designed to make Corwin look incompetent. Again, Cale said, throwing Corwin to the sand for the 4th time. You're telegraphing the entry. You'll get killed doing it like that. Corwin got up. His jaw was set. He was 26 years old, and he had enough pride to fuel a small war, but he also had enough intelligence to know when he was being used as a prop. Riley stopped 6 feet away. "Senior Chief." Cale looked up. "Ma'am? Who assigned your pairings this morning?" A half-second pause. "I assessed that these pairings would be more productive." "That's my assessment to make. Return to your assigned partner." "With respect, ma'am, I have more field experience than—" "I didn't ask about your field experience." Riley's voice was flat and precise and absolutely final. "I asked you to return to your assigned partner. That was an instruction, Senior Chief, not a suggestion. Now." The yard had stopped, every man watching. Cale held her gaze for 3 full seconds. She could see the calculation behind his eyes. Options, outcomes, the architecture of a man deciding how much this moment was worth. Then he nodded once, tight, controlled, and moved back to his original position without another word. Riley turned to Corwin. "Your entry was fine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Corwin blinked. "Ma'am?" "The technique was correct. The hesitation at the end was new. That's what happens when someone spends 15 minutes convincing you you're doing it wrong. Reset your baseline and drill it clean." She walked away before he could respond. But she heard him behind her, resetting a stance, drilling it clean, and she heard the quality of his movements change. Confidence returning to his joints. The difference between a man performing under scrutiny and a man executing because he knows it's right. Behind her, Cale said nothing, but 3 men near him exchanged a look. The afternoon brought something Riley had not planned for, which was the first time in 4 days anything had surprised her. She was running the unit through a reaction time drill, paired responses to random attack signals, designed to build the automatic response pathways that her father had called the space between fear and action. When Mara Solis executed a technique so clean and so fast that the entire drill sequence stopped around her. Her partner stood with Riley's grip lock applied to his forearm, and an expression of genuine bewilderment on his face. And Mara stood behind the technique with her weight distributed and her breathing steady. And for a moment, nobody said anything at all. Then Corwin started clapping. Slow at first, then real. 3 other men joined in. Mara looked at Riley. Riley gave her a single nod. Mara's jaw tightened the way jaws tighten when people are working hard not to let something show on their face. Cale did not clap, but he watched. That night, at 2300, Riley was running technique drills alone in the training yard when she heard footsteps. Not Mara this time. Heavier, deliberate, the specific cadence of someone who had made a decision and was following it through. She stopped and turned. Cale stood at the edge of the yard. Out of uniform, civilian clothes, hands at his sides, which somehow made him look less certain than the uniform did. He was reading as genuinely uncertain, and that was new enough that Riley went still and just watched him close the distance. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Off the record." "There's no off the record in a training program, Senior Chief." "Then on the record." He stopped 6 feet away. "How did you get here? I read your file. 2 years of BUD/S prep, 4 SEAL qualification attempts before they accepted the program change, 14 months of advanced CQB under instructors who didn't want to teach you. That's a lot of ground to cover for a program that half the command thinks is a political exercise." Riley looked at him. "Is that a question? Why didn't you quit?" She hadn't expected that. The honesty of it, the actual weight behind it. Not a challenge, not strategy. A real question from a man who had never had to ask himself the same thing, and was genuinely trying to understand an experience outside his own. Because my father died for 3 seconds, she said. 3 seconds of hesitation that I could have helped him eliminate if I'd been trained right. If anyone had trained right. She paused. Quitting would have meant those 3 seconds were the end of the story. I needed them to mean something else. Cale was quiet for a long moment. My brother came home from Mosul in a flag, he said. IED. Nothing anyone could have done differently. But I've been running that day in my head for 2 years, trying to find the thing that would have changed it. The silence between them was different now. Not a contest. Something else. There wasn't a thing, Riley said. Sometimes there isn't. But sometimes there is, and that's why we're here. He nodded once, turned to leave, then stopped. The men are watching you, ma'am. More than you know. Not all of them are against you. I know, she said. He left. Riley stood alone in the dark, recalibrating everything. Day 6 arrived with the kind of pressure that changed the quality of air. Rear Admiral Holt had moved the field exercise up, and Vice Admiral Sandra Chen had moved her arrival up to match. And somehow the combination of those two facts had traveled through the unit's awareness the way information always traveled through military units. Instantly, without official announcement, fully formed and already generating anxiety. Vice Admiral Chen, the highest-ranking woman in naval special warfare. 30 years of being the only woman in every room that mattered. She had not gotten there by being patient with programs that failed to deliver, and everyone on base knew it. Riley gathered the unit at 0600 and laid it out without ceremony. 48-hour field exercise begins tomorrow at 0600. You hunt Rear Admiral Holt and me across 20 square miles of terrain. Non-lethal marking rounds. If you mark us both, you win. If either of us remains unmarked at hour 48, we win. Vice Admiral Chen will be observing from the field. From the field, Corwin said. She doesn't evaluate from monitors. Get used to it. Cale's hand came up. Rules of engagement on the casualty scenario? Riley looked at him. Something moved through the yard. The specific tension of men recognizing that the senior chief had just acknowledged the existence of a casualty scenario, which meant he had done his research, which meant he was taking this seriously. If a real injury occurs, Riley said evenly, you make the call. Mission or Marine. That decision, and everything that follows, is on the senior operator present. What's the right answer? I'm not going to tell you that. Ma'am, that's the exercise, Senior Chief. There are no practice decisions. You make the call, and you live with it. That's what command is. Cale held her gaze. Understood. That afternoon, Mara found Riley checking kit in the equipment room. He came to talk to you last night, Mara said. I saw him go out to the yard. Did you? What did he say? That's between him and me. Mara leaned against the door frame. Is he going to be a problem tomorrow? Riley looked up. Damian Cale is the best tactical mind in that formation. If he decides to actually lead instead of perform, your unit passes this exercise. If he doesn't, she paused. Then you and Corwin are going to have to pick up the slack. Us? You've been the fastest learner in that yard since day 1. You think I haven't noticed? Mara stared at her. I thought you were paying attention to Cale. I pay attention to everyone. Riley went back to her kit. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is real. At 0540 the next morning, 19 people stood in the pre-dawn dark. Holt and Riley on one side, with minimal gear and everything they knew. 18 SEALs on the other side, with technology and numbers and 48 hours. Vice Admiral Sandra Chen stood to the right of the formation. 60 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that came from having survived 30 years of rooms that didn't want her in them. She looked at Riley once, a long, direct look that said nothing and communicated everything. "You have your objective," Holt told the formation. "We get a 30-minute head start. Then you hunt." He and Riley walked into the pre-dawn dark and disappeared. Behind them, Cale turned to his formation. "Squads up. Dispersion pattern Delta. We move in 29 minutes." And for the first time since day one, every man in the formation moved without hesitation. Somewhere in the dark ahead, Riley heard none of this, but she already knew it was happening. Because she had been watching Damien Cale for 6 days, and she understood the architecture of a man coming around. The stages of it, the specific resistance before the release. She had seen it before. In the mirror, 14 years ago, standing in a recruiting office in Portland, with a grief she didn't know what to do with, and a decision that hadn't fully formed yet. The exercise had begun, and nothing that followed would be clean, or simple, or safe, which meant it was exactly the right kind of training. The first ambush hit at hour 6. 11 SEALs marked in 20 seconds. Smoke, precision fire, gone before the formation finished processing what happened. The survivors scrambled, shouting, Cale's voice cutting through the chaos with damage control orders that were good, genuinely good, but 20 seconds too late. Riley and Holt were already 300 yards away, moving low and fast through terrain they had walked twice the previous night, specifically so their feet would know it in the dark. "They'll tighten dispersion now," Holt said quietly. "Cale's smart enough for that." "He'll also try to predict our pattern," Riley said. "Run the same ambush geometry a second time and he'll be waiting for it." "So we don't run it a second time." "No, we let him predict the pattern. Then we go somewhere the pattern doesn't account for." Holt looked at her sideways. "Your father used to call that feeding the assumption." Riley didn't answer. She was already moving. Back in the shattered formation, Cale was doing exactly what she expected, pulling his remaining 7 operators tight, reassigning sectors, building a new search pattern that accounted for the ambush geometry and triangulated probable positions. It was good tactical thinking. Disciplined. The kind of response that proved he was actually a gifted commander when his ego stopped occupying the space his judgment needed. Mara Solis was running left flank, Corwin on right. They had found a rhythm in the last 6 days that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with the specific competence that Riley had been building in both of them, one repetition at a time. "Contact north," Corwin said over the radio. "Possible movement, rocky outcropping, 300 meters. Cale keyed his radio. "Confirm?" "Negative confirmation, but the pattern fits." "Walsh, you read that?" Mara's voice came back clean and level. "I read it. Feels like bait, Senior Chief." 3 seconds of silence. "Agreed," Cale said. "We don't go north. Corwin, hold your position. Everyone else, redirect south-southwest. They want us looking north." Riley, 300 meters north, heard none of this. But when Holt murmured, "They're not coming," she smiled once, tight and genuine. "He's learning," she said. "Is that good for us right now?" "It's good for them. That's the point." Hour 9 brought the second ambush. And this one was different because Riley designed it to be personal. She had studied Cale's tactical patterns across 6 days of training. The tells in his decision-making. The half-second delay before he committed to a flanking maneuver. The specific geometry he defaulted to when he felt pressure from the right. She had built this ambush around those patterns, the way a lock is built around a specific key. The formation moved through a narrow approach between two rock formations. Cale had his people in good dispersion, moving carefully, checking angles. Professional and thorough. She let them get 2/3 through before Holt opened from the north and drew their attention hard left. Then Riley came from directly behind. She was through the rear of the formation before anyone registered her presence. Marking rounds, controlled bursts, 4 operators tagged in 8 seconds. She was already gone when Cale spun and fired at the space she had just vacated. His marking round hit empty air. "Contact rear! Contact rear! All elements, she's behind us!" Too late. 4 more down. 11 eliminated total. 7 remaining. And then Riley did the thing that was not in the tactical manual. The thing her father had taught her on the back porch in Portland when she was 10 years old, and too impatient to understand why it mattered. She stopped. Turned back. Let Cale see her for exactly 3 seconds. Standing in the open, fully visible, not running. "Come get me, Senior Chief," she said. Not loud, just enough. Then she was gone. Behind her, she heard Cale breathing hard, heard him pull his remaining operators together, heard his voice when he spoke to them. And what she heard in his voice was not the performance of a man managing his image. It was the real voice, stripped down, focused. The voice of a commander who had stopped fighting the lesson and started learning it. "She wants us to chase," he said. "So we don't chase. We think. Where does she have to be in 2 hours? Work the problem backward. Move smart." Riley rounded a rock formation and found Holt waiting. "He's not chasing," Holt said. "No. You could have marked him just now." "I know." "Why didn't you?" She thought about her father, about the night in Kandahar when he had saved 4 men and paid for it in 3 seconds. About what it meant to win an exercise versus what it meant to build something that lasted past the exercise. "Because him learning to think is worth more than me winning a drill," she said. Holt was quiet for a moment. James would have said the same thing. "I know." She checked the terrain. "We need to move. He's working the problem backward now. He'll find our position in about 40 minutes. And then? Then we let him. Hour 14. Dark. Temperature dropped hard the way it did in the California desert at night. Fast and total. The kind of cold that made people want fires and noise and comfort. The SEALs made camp in defensive formation. No fires. Cale had them rationing water, posting rotating watch, maintaining noise discipline. 7 men left out of 18. More than half the unit eliminated. But the 7 remaining were moving like a unit now, not like individuals who happened to be standing near each other. Mara was on first watch when Corwin came to sit beside her. "We're going to lose this," he said quietly. "Probably." "Does that bother you?" Mara looked at the dark terrain and thought about 8 months of being tolerated in this unit. Thought about the night in the training yard when Riley had shown her a grip break and said, "Mean it." And something had unlocked that she hadn't known was locked. Not the way it would have bothered me 2 weeks ago. What changed? I stopped thinking winning the drill was the point. Corwin was quiet for a moment. "She got to you." "She got to all of us, even Cale." Mara paused. "He's different tonight. You notice that?" "Yeah." Corwin leaned back. "Less like he's performing, and more like he's actually here." 2 miles away in the dark, Cale was doing something Riley had not predicted. He was writing. In a small field notebook, by the light of a red filtered penlight, writing down every tactical error from the last 14 hours, and next to each error, the correct response. Not for the evaluation, not for the official record, for himself. The private document of a man genuinely trying to understand where his thinking had failed and why. He had been doing this for every deployment since Fallujah, since his brother's flag. He had never done it mid-exercise before. Hour 20 brought the real injury, and it arrived without warning or design, which was the truest thing about it. Corwin's boot caught a loose rock in the dark. The sound of his ankle was audible to every operator within 20 feet. Not a sprain, the specific crack that meant something structural had failed. He went down hard and silent the way trained men went down. No scream, just controlled breathing and the face of someone working very hard to manage something that hurt enormously. "Status," Cale said, already at his side. "Ankle. Bad." Corwin's voice was steady. "I can't move on it, Senior Chief." Cale looked at his remaining 6 operators, looked at the terrain. They were 300 meters from Riley's last confirmed position, the closest they had been in 14 hours. The best tactical opportunity of the entire exercise, and Jax Corwin was on the ground. Mara keyed her radio before Cale could speak. "Senior Chief, we need to call it." "Walsh." "Real injury, no medic. We are 3 miles from the nearest vehicle. If that ankle is fractured and we wait until the exercise clock runs out, we are causing actual harm to an actual person so we can win a training exercise." Her voice was not loud. It was very clear. "That is not a trade I'm willing to make." Every operator looked at Cale. He looked at Corwin, looked at the terrain where Riley and Holt were somewhere close in the dark, looked at his notebook in his chest pocket, looked at Mara, who was watching him with steady dark eyes, and the particular stillness of someone who had already made their decision and was waiting to see if the person in charge of her would make the right one. 10 seconds. The most important 10 seconds of the exercise. "Call for medevac," Cale said. "Walsh, you've got the radio. Confirm our position and get the bird in the air." "Senior Chief, that terminates the exercise." "I know what it terminates." His voice was flat and final, and completely without doubt. "Make the call." Mara made the call. 40 meters away, behind a rock formation, Riley lowered her binoculars and looked at Holt. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Holt said, very quietly, "They passed." "Yes," Riley said. "They did." She keyed her radio. "All operators, exercise terminated. Medical helicopter inbound to your position. Remain in place." Then she stood up from concealment and walked toward the lights of Cale's position, Holt beside her. Both of them visible, uncovered, walking into the open the way you walked when the fight was over, and something more important had replaced it. Cale saw them coming and stood. His 6 remaining operators stood with him, paint-marked and exhausted and cold, and something else that was harder to name. Riley stopped 5 feet from him, looked at him directly. "You had a clean shot at winning this exercise 20 minutes ago." "Yes, ma'am." "You didn't take it." "No." "Why?" Cale was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of a man saying something true for the first time. "Because Corwin matters more than the score." The helicopter arrived 8 minutes later. The rotors beat the cold air and the lights swept across the terrain, and Corwin went up on a stretcher, his ankle stabilized, already arguing with the medics about whether he actually needed to go. Vice Admiral Chen materialized from the dark, 40 feet away, her silver hair and military bearing unchanged by 14 hours in the field. She walked directly to Riley. "Instructor Voss." "Ma'am?" Chen looked at Kale, at the 6 operators behind him, at Mara Solis standing at Kale's left shoulder with her chin up and her bearing carrying none of the apologetic smallness that had characterized her first day in the formation. "How long have you been running this program?" Chen asked. 6 days of instruction, ma'am. Tonight is day 7. 7 days. Chen absorbed that. That decision Petty Officer Solis pushed for, the medevac call, that came from your instruction? It came from her, Riley said. I gave her the framework. She made the choice. Chen looked at Mara for a long moment. Mara did not look away. What made you certain? Chen asked. My father left a man behind once, Mara said. Fallujah. The man survived. My father didn't. She paused. Some trades aren't worth making. Ma'am. Chen said nothing for 3 seconds. Then she turned back to Riley. I'll want a full briefing in the morning. Everything you've built here. I want to understand how it transfers. Yes, ma'am. Chen started to walk away. Then she stopped. Without turning back, she said, Your father trained 2 officers in my class at Coronado. 2001. Both of them are still alive. A pause. That's what good instruction looks like. Welcome to the conversation, Instructor Voss. She walked into the dark. Riley stood with the cold desert air moving through her hair and the photograph pressed against her chest, and her father's 14 years of silence suddenly feeling less like absence and more like the long space before something begins. Behind her, Cale spoke. Ma'am? She turned. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who had arrived somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive. I owe you an apology. I owe the unit an apology. He glanced at Mara. I owe Petty Officer Solis about 8 months of apologies. Mara said nothing, but something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness yet, not this fast, but the opening of a door. Start tomorrow, Riley said to Cale. Mean it every day. That's all an apology is worth. He nodded. She looked at the remaining 6 operators. Cold, marked, exhausted, changed. You failed the tactical objective, she said. You didn't capture us. You lost more than half your force. She paused. And you made the only decision that actually matters when everything else falls apart. You chose each other. The desert wind moved through the silence. My father made the same choice, Riley said. 14 years ago in Kandahar. He chose his team over the mission. It cost him everything. Her voice stayed level. I used to think that was the tragedy. It took me a long time to understand that it was the point. Nobody spoke. Get some rest, she said. Debrief at 0700. She walked away from the group, alone, into the dark where nobody could see her face. Pulled the photograph from her breast pocket. Her father in dress uniform, young and certain, eyes the same shape as hers. I think they're ready, Dad, she said quietly, to the night, to the stars, to the specific silence that had been answering her for 14 years. The helicopter was a distant light now, carrying Corwin toward a field hospital where his ankle would be stabilized and he would be told he would need 3 weeks off weight-bearing activities. He would spend those 3 weeks writing down everything Riley Voss had taught him. He would pass it forward for the next 20 years of his career without once needing to be asked. That was how the real work traveled. Not through official programs or Pentagon endorsements, through the specific gravity of people who had been changed and carried the change forward into every room they ever entered. Riley had learned that from her father. Now she had passed it on. The debrief at 0700 was not what anyone expected. Riley walked in and sat down instead of standing at the front of the room. Just pulled a chair to the middle of the space, turned it around, straddled it, and looked at the formation of exhausted, paint-marked SEALs, like she had all the time in the world and nothing to perform. The shift in energy was immediate. Men who had been braced for evaluation relaxed half a degree. Not enough to be careless, enough to be honest. "Tell me what you did wrong," she said. "Not what I did right. What you did wrong. Start from 0600 yesterday and walk me through every mistake you made. Don't skip anything because you're embarrassed by it. The embarrassing ones are the ones that will kill you." Silence for 2 seconds. Then Cale spoke. "We moved too fast in the first hour." His voice was flat and direct, the voice of a man doing an honest accounting. "I let confidence set the pace instead of terrain assessment. That's why the first ambush worked. We walked into it because we thought we knew where you'd be." Keep going. Hour 4. I held the formation too tight after the second ambush. Overcorrected. Left the right flank exposed for 20 minutes while I was focused on re-establishing center. Walsh. Mara looked up. I hesitated before calling the medevac. 40 seconds. I knew what the right call was, and I waited 40 seconds before I made it, because I was afraid you'd counted against us. What changed? Corwin was on the ground, she said simply. And suddenly, what I was afraid of seemed like the wrong thing to be afraid of. Riley nodded, looked around the room. Anyone else? Corwin spoke from the back, his ankle elevated on the second chair. I trusted my footing in the dark because I'd been moving well all day. Stop checking. That's why I went down. A pause. That's the kind of mistake that gets made after things have been going right for a while. When you stop respecting the terrain because you've stopped being afraid of it. The room was quiet. "Everything you just said," Riley told him, "is what this program exists to produce. Not perfect execution, honest assessment. The ability to look at your own failure without flinching and extract the lesson before the lesson extracts you." She stood. "My father was the best operator naval special warfare had seen in a generation. He died because nobody taught him to honestly assess the gap in his own training. Nobody told him that 3 seconds of hesitation in a civilian identification protocol was a vulnerability. It wasn't in the manual. It wasn't drilled. And it killed him." Nobody moved. "The techniques I taught you will degrade without practice. The physical skills will fade. But what you just did in this room, the honest accounting, no ego, no performance, that doesn't degrade. That compounds. Every time you do it, you get better at it. And eventually, it becomes the automatic response." She looked at Cale. "That's what mastery actually is. Not perfect execution. The ability to be wrong, see it clearly, and correct faster than the situation punishes you." Cale held her gaze. Something in his expression had been building for the last 12 hours, and it was fully formed now. Not admiration exactly, not the softness of a converted skeptic. Something harder and more durable. Today, the program ends. We go back to our... Today, the program ends. We go back to our assignments. How do we keep this from being just a thing that happened once? Riley looked at him for a long moment. "You teach it," she said. "Every technique I gave you, you give to the next person. Every honest debrief you run in this room, you run in your next unit. The knowledge doesn't belong to you. It moves through you. And if the next command doesn't want it, they will, she said. After you keep coming home when other units don't, that's the argument that works. The formal evaluation ceremony was at 1400. Vice Admiral Chen ran it with the specific efficiency of someone who had attended enough military ceremonies to have stripped them to their essential content. Unit Commendation. Exceptional Readiness Certification. Official Pentagon Program Endorsement, signed and dated and real. When Riley's name was called for the Combat Instructor Excellence designation, she walked forward and stood before Chen, and for a moment, the two women looked at each other. 30 years and a generation of resistance between them. The same fight at different altitudes. And Chen pinned the designation with hands that did not perform the gravity of the moment, because the gravity was already there without performance. "Well done," Chen said quietly. "Not for the formation, for Riley." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. You built something here that I've been trying to get the Navy to build for 15 years. I'm angry it took this long, and grateful it's finally done." She stepped back. "I'm recommending you for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group's integrated curriculum. Senior instructor. You'd be building programs, not running them." Riley processed that. "I don't want to stop running them." Chen looked at her. "You'd run those too, but you'd also be deciding what the next generation of instructors teaches. Your father's methodology, formalized, institutionalized, carried forward at scale." She paused. "Think about it." After the ceremony, Cale found her alone. He didn't have a speech prepared. She could tell. He was standing with his hands not quite settled. The slight physical uncertainty of a man who had decided to say something honest without knowing exactly how it would land. "I told 3 men in this unit that you were a political appointment," he said. "In the first 2 days, before I watched you work, I said it to undermine you before you had a chance to prove anything." Riley waited. "That was wrong. Not tactically wrong. Morally wrong. You deserved a clean start, and I didn't give you one." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry." The apology sat between them with real weight. Not the performed version, not the technically correct version that covered liability and moved on. The actual thing. "I know why you did it," Riley said. No, it doesn't make it right. But I know why." She looked at him steadily. "Your brother, Fallujah. You've been carrying that for 2 years, and when I walked into this yard, you saw something that threatened the framework you built around the grief. The certainty that what you know is enough, that if you're good enough, the people you love don't end up in flags." Cale's jaw tightened. That's what I saw in you on day 1, she said. Not arrogance. Fear. The same fear I had when I walked into a recruiting office at 18, because I couldn't stand the idea that my father's death was just a random event with no lesson inside it. The silence that followed was the kind that happened after true things were said. Uncomfortable and necessary. "Did you find the lesson?" Cale asked, very quietly. "Yes," Riley said. "The lesson is that the gap between who we are and who we need to be is always closable. Always. It takes work and honesty and the willingness to be wrong in front of people who are watching. But it closes." She paused. "Your brother's gap wasn't closable. That wasn't a training failure. That was an IED on a road in Mosul. Those are different things." Cale looked at the ground. When he looked back up, his eyes were different. Something had moved behind them. Something that had been stuck for 2 years. "Take it forward, Senior Chief," Riley said. "That's all any of us can do." He saluted her, precise, full, the real version. She returned it. He walked away different than he had arrived. Not fixed. Nobody gets fixed in 3 weeks. But pointed in a new direction, with enough momentum to keep moving. Mara found Riley 20 minutes later at the edge of the training yard, the last time she would stand there before her reassignment orders kicked in the following morning. She handed Riley a folded piece of paper without preamble. "Don't read it now. Read it when you doubt whether this matters." Riley took it. "Mara, ma'am, you called that medevac before Cale did. You knew what it would cost, and you made the call anyway." Riley held her gaze. "That's not a small thing. Do you understand that? I had a good teacher." "You had yourself," Riley said firmly. "I gave you tools. You decided what they were worth. Those are different things." Mara stood straighter, the last of the apologetic smallness gone from her posture. Not overnight, but over 7 days of someone seeing her clearly and refusing to look away. "They're recommending me for advanced instructor candidacy," she said. "Holt told me this morning." "I know. I recommended you." "Is that why?" "No," Riley said. "You earned it by making a decision under pressure that a lot of more experienced operators would have gotten wrong. The recommendation just says that out loud, officially." Mara's chin came up. Not with arrogance, with the specific dignity of someone who had stopped apologizing for the space they occupied. "I'm going to teach this," Mara said. "Everything you gave me. I'm going to pass it forward." "I know you are." They stood together for a moment in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Then Mara said, "Your father would recognize you." Riley looked at the training yard. The hard-packed sand and the pull-up bars and the space where 18 SEALs had stood and made assumptions and been changed by the consequences of those assumptions. The place where Cale had hit the sand and gotten up different. Where Corwin had started asking real questions. Where Mara Solis had stopped making herself small. "I think about that sometimes," Riley said honestly. "Whether he'd see what I became, or just see everything I changed about what he taught me." "What did you change?" "He believed the fundamentals were enough. That if you mastered the technical foundation, you could survive anything." Riley was quiet for a moment. He was almost right. The fundamentals are necessary, but they're not sufficient. You also need the people. You need to decide that the people matter more than the score, more than the mission, more than your own survival sometimes. She touched the photograph in her breast pocket without taking it out. That's the thing he knew but never got to teach. He died demonstrating it. That evening, Holt called her into his office. He did not sit behind his desk. He stood at the window, the way people stood when they were trying to find the right words for something that mattered. "I have something that belongs to you," he said. He turned around. In his hand, a set of dog tags. Old, worn, the chain darkened with time and use. He held them out without ceremony because the moment didn't need ceremony. It needed the opposite. Riley took them with hands that were not completely steady. Read the engraving. Voss, Daniel R., Commander USN. She had not held these in 14 years. Had not known where they were. Had assumed, somewhere in the complicated accounting of grief, that they were gone. "I was with him when he went down," Holt said. "I kept them because I didn't know how to send them home to an 8-year-old girl. And eventually, I stopped knowing how to send them at all. I've been waiting for the right moment." He paused. "I think this is it." Riley closed her hand around the tags and stood with that for a long time. He was afraid the morning it happened, Holt said. I want you to know that. He told me. He said he was afraid, and I asked him what he did with fear, and he said, I make it smaller than the thing I'm doing it for. His voice was level and careful. You are what he was doing it for. The thing Riley had been carrying for 14 years. The grief and the drive and the burning need to make 3 seconds of hesitation mean something larger than a funeral. Shifted. Not gone, not resolved into something simple, but changed in quality. The way weight changes when it becomes load-bearing instead of just heavy. She put her father's dog tags around her neck, felt the worn metal settle against her collarbone, next to the photograph she had carried since she was 18 years old. Thank you, sir, she said. He thanked me once, Holt replied, for keeping him alive through a particularly bad extraction in '98. I told him the same thing I'm telling you now. Don't thank me. Pass it forward. 6 months later, Damien Cale's team was running a compound raid in Erbil when communications went dark and air support was delayed 30 minutes, and 3 of his operators were inside a building with a hostile combatant and no backup. Cale moved. Fluid, centerline controlled, the specific movement pattern that Riley Voss had drilled into him across 7 days of California desert. He cleared the building in 90 seconds. All 3 operators came out. 0 casualties. In the debrief report, under Training Application, he wrote 1 line. Voss CQB methodology. It held. And Mara Solis, 8 months after Coronado, became the first woman to graduate the Naval Special Warfare Advanced Instructor Program in its history. During her graduation address, she spoke about a 22-year-old instructor who had walked into a yard full of men who had already decided she didn't belong and had not asked permission to be dangerous. The commandant asked for Riley's contact information before Mara finished speaking. The ripples moved outward the way her father's had, invisible and permanent, through every room those operators entered, every unit they touched, every decision they made in the dark when no one was watching, and the only question that mattered was whether they had the foundation to hold. At Coronado, 1 year after the program ended, a new class stood in the training yard. 40 operators, mixed unit, skeptical faces. A young petty officer in the front row looked Riley up and down and smirked the way young men smirked when they had not yet been educated about the difference between confidence and competence. Ma'am, with respect, what can you teach us that a combat deployment hasn't already? Riley touched the dog tags at her throat. Her father's weight, her father's voice. 14 years of grief compressed into something that had become the most load-bearing part of her structure. She looked at the petty officer with the calm gray eyes that had been making overconfident people reconsider their assumptions since day 1 at Coronado. I warned the last unit, she said quietly. They didn't listen at first. She walked to the center of the training mat. They learned. 40 hands went up. Outside, the Pacific moved against the edge of the continent, the way it had always moved. Indifferent, enormous, eternal. But in the training yard at Coronado, something was happening that was none of those things. Something specific and human and durable, passed forward from a man who died in 3 seconds of hesitation to a daughter who had spent 14 years turning those 3 seconds into a foundation that would hold long after both of them were gone. Riley Voss looked at 40 faces waiting to be changed, touched her father's dog tags one last time, and began to teach. She did not ask for permission. She never had.